She woke up with a wedding ring on her finger, and a man she didn't recognize sleeping right beside her. Her heart didn't hammer with fear. Instead, an unsettling, magnetic calm held her pinned to the mattress. He was built like a fortress, his frame dominating the bed, yet his arm was draped over her waist with a care that felt entirely instinctual. When his eyes blinked open, there was no surprise in his gaze. There was only a dark, consuming focus. "You're awake," he said, his voice deep and smooth, stripped of any morning grogginess. "Who are you?" Her voice was a whisper, her mind searching the blank canvas of her recent past. She knew her name, her favorite songs, the city streets outside, but this room and this man were entirely missing. "I am Yuryeong," he said, sitting up slowly. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His touch was heavy, a silent assertion of ownership that sent an intense shiver straight down her spine. "I am your husband. You belong here, with me." The sheer authority in his tone should have driven her away, but her body betrayed her, melting into the warmth of his hand. He controlled the entire space around them, an unspoken dominance that made it clear he answered to no one, except, perhaps, her comfort. When she tried to step out of bed, he lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the dining pavilion himself. The staff stood in absolute, rigid silence, their eyes firmly fixed on the floor. A young guard stepped forward to hand her a glass of water, but Yuryeong intercepted it with a chilling glare that made the man instantly retreat. "No one serves her but me," Yuryeong murmured, his grip on the glass firm as he held it to her lips. He watched her drink, his eyes tracking every swallow with a hungry, protective intensity that felt less like affection and more like an obsession. He wasn't just taking care of her. He was guarding her from the world, isolating her within his absolute care. "If we are married," she said, her voice trembling slightly under the weight of his gaze, "why can't I remember you?" Yuryeong placed the glass down, his eyes never leaving hers. He leaned in close, his presence entirely overwhelming. "Your mind is just resting, but your heart knows exactly who I am." Later, left alone in his study while he managed his business, her fingers traced the edge of a heavy silver frame on the desk. It was a wedding photograph. She looked radiant, laughing into his chest while he looked at the camera with the exact same fierce, uncompromising possessiveness he had shown her all morning. A strange ache bloomed in her chest. She didn't know him, yet looking at the photo, the thought of leaving him felt entirely impossible. She woke up the next morning to the exact same blank slate, but the instinctual pull toward him was already waiting. Yuryeong was watching her, propped on his elbow, his gaze fixed on her face as if he hadn't blinked all night. The routine began anew, seamless and unhurried. He dressed her himself, his touch deliberate and unyielding, refusing to let the maids enter the room. He handled her like a priceless, fragile possession that he alone had the right to touch. "You don't remember," he stated quietly, fastening a delicate gold clasp around her wrist. It wasn't a question. "No," she murmured, looking down at his hands. "But I know the sound of your voice. I knew it the second I opened my eyes." A dark satisfaction flickered in his expression. He liked this power dynamic, the fact that even when her mind betrayed him, her body remained completely, entirely submissive to his presence. He led her down the grand hallway, his arm firmly anchored around her waist, pulling her flush against his side whenever a guard passed them. His territory was absolute, and she was the center of it. On his desk sat a leather-bound journal. He opened it and turned it toward her. Written in his sharp, elegant handwriting were the words, "You love the terrace at noon. You do not like sugar in your tea. You told me you loved me on a Tuesday." "I write things down so you don't have to wander in the dark," Yuryeong said, leaning over her shoulder as she read. His breath brushed her ear, sending a spark of heat straight down her spine. "Every day, I will teach you who you are to me." "And who am I to you?" she asked, turning her head. Their lips were inches apart. The air between them thickened, heavy with a sudden, suffocating tension. "My pulse," he whispered, his hand sliding up to grip the back of her neck, tilting her face upward. He didn't kiss her, holding her just on the agonizing edge of desire, letting her feel the full weight of his obsession. The only thing keeping me anchored. Later that afternoon, a man named Marcus, a longtime friend of her family, was permitted into the courtyard under heavy guard. The moment Marcus stepped forward to greet her, Yuryeong closed the distance between them, stepping directly into Marcus's path. The air froze. Yuryeong didn't raise his voice, but the sheer territorial menace radiating from him made Marcus instantly take a step back. "Keep your distance," Yuryeong commanded, his voice cold, a sharp contrast to the warmth he showed her. Marcus looked past him to her, his eyes wide with a mixture of pity and anxiety. "Louisa, do you really not know what he is? What happened?" Before she could process the question, Yuryeong waved his hand, and the guards instantly dragged Marcus away. Louisa stood frozen, a sudden, inexplicable wave of panic washing over her. She didn't remember Marcus well, but his words left a cold, lingering dread in her chest. That night, the house was suffocatingly quiet. Louisa couldn't sleep. The name Marcus rattled around her empty mind, acting as a key to a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. Fragments of a memory, sharp, disjointed, and heavy, began to pierce through the fog. She remembered a rainy evening 8 months ago. She remembered Marcus asking her for a simple favor, a location, a timeline. He had phrased it so innocently, asking when Yuryeong's convoy would be passing the lower docks, claiming it was for a routine delivery coordination. She had given it to him gladly, eager to help a lifelong family friend. She hadn't known Marcus was deeply indebted to Yuryeong's rivals. She hadn't known she was signing a death warrant. Louisa sat up in bed, gasping as the realization hit her like a physical blow. The ambush. The horrific sound of screeching tires and tearing metal echoing from a distance while she waited at home. Yuryeong had survived, barely, returning to the estate covered in ash and someone else's blood, his eyes wild with a terrifying relief when he found her safe. He had never told her who leaked the coordinates. He had buried the truth to protect her from the crushing weight of her own mistake. The guilt was a sudden, physical sickness in her throat. Her mind hadn't broken from fear. It had shut down to protect her from the agonizing reality that her innocence had almost destroyed the man who ruled her world. The door clicked open. Yuryeong stood in the entryway, his silhouette imposing, blocking out the light from the hallway. He didn't need to ask if she knew. He could see the shattered look in her eyes. "You look at me differently tonight," he said, stepping into the room. He didn't sound angry. The utter absence of fury in his voice made the dynamic between them shift drastically. He wasn't a monster punishing a betrayal. He was a man entirely enslaved by his need to keep her by his side. "It was me," she whispered, her voice cracking as she pulled the blanket tightly against her chest. "Marcus used me. I almost killed you." Yuryeong closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, climbing onto the bed and pulling her hands away from her face with unyielding strength. He pinned her wrists to the mattress, leaning down until his eyes locked onto hers with a fierce, burning obsession. "Marcus is irrelevant," Yuryeong commanded, his voice tight with an intense, possessive finality. "The rivals are gone. I carry that night so you don't have to. Your only job is to belong to me." "But I betrayed you," she wept, looking up at the man who held her captive in his affection. "You made a mistake," he murmured, his face dropping close to hers, his grip softening but remaining entirely inescapable. "And I would let the world burn before I let you blame yourself for it." The clock ticked past midnight, and she absolutely refused to close her eyes. She sat rigidly on the edge of the mattress, fighting the heavy, pulling weight of exhaustion. Sleep meant an inevitable reset. It meant waking up tomorrow completely ignorant of her own devastating mistake, only to feel that gnawing, nameless dread all over again while he smiled through the pain. Yuryeong knelt before her, his posture a stark contrast to the absolute authority he commanded everywhere else. He took her trembling hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles. There was no rush in his movements, only a deliberate, all-consuming focus. "Let it go," he whispered softly. "Stop fighting the tide." "If I sleep, I lose this," she pleaded, tears blurring her vision. "I lose the truth. I'll wake up tomorrow and you'll have to pretend all over again. I don't want to forget how much you sacrificed to keep me." He stood, drawing her up with him. "Then I will give you something stronger than memory to hold on to." He didn't carry her to the pillows this time. Instead, he pulled her flush against his chest, sliding his hands through her hair to tilt her face up. When he finally kissed her, it wasn't the restrained, cautious affection he had shown her every morning prior. It was profound, hungry, and entirely desperate. He poured every ounce of his hidden devotion into the kiss, laying absolute claim to her mind and soul. She yielded completely, her defenses crumbling under his dominance. The kiss deepened, slowing into a deliberate, searing exploration that left her completely disoriented in the best way possible. He undressed her with steadfast, deliberate intent, treating the act like a deeply sacred ritual. Every brush of his skin against hers acted as an anchor, heavy with a silent vow that he would never let her slip away. They moved to the bed together, in a tangle of limbs and discarded silk. He hovered over her, his gaze dark and entirely fixed on her face, ensuring she felt the full magnitude of his unyielding presence. He worshipped her with a slow, agonizing reverence, tracing the curve of her collarbone with his lips. There was no urgency, only a deeply intimate rhythm that bound them inextricably together, stripping away the lingering shadows of her self-hatred. "You are completely mine," he murmured against her skin, his voice thick with a devotion that bordered on madness. "The past does not own you. The guilt does not own you. I do." He loved her until the fear finally bled out of her, replaced by a searing, undeniable warmth. As the ultimate peak of exhaustion finally claimed her, pulling her down into the quiet darkness of sleep, she didn't feel terrified of forgetting. She only felt perfectly, inescapably held. She woke up to the soft morning light filtering into the room, her gaze immediately landing on Yuryeong, who was already awake and watching her with tense, guarded stillness. He was waiting for the inevitable question, his entire body rigid with the expectation of becoming a stranger once again. But the crushing weight of the reset didn't come. Instead, A flood of fragmented memories rushed forward, instantly followed by the sharp, stinging recollection of her own past mistake. The realization that she had unintentionally compromised his safety hit her anew, causing her to pull away from him instantly. She scrambled backward to the headboard, bringing her knees to her chest as the guilt resurfaced with agonizing clarity. "Louisa?" Yuryeong's voice was sharp, a sudden panic breaking through his usual stoic composure. He moved toward her, but stopped when he saw the sheer anguish on her face. "You shouldn't be looking at me like that," she choked out, tears instantly blinding her. I remember what Marcus did, and I remember what I did. How can you look at me with so much devotion when my carelessness almost cost you your life? You must secretly despise me. You must resent me every single time you have to rebuild our relationship from scratch." Yuryeong didn't hesitate. He closed the distance between them, ignoring her attempt to shrink away. He grabbed her ankles, pulling her forward effortlessly until she was pinned directly beneath him. His grip on her wrists was firm, entirely unyielding, reasserting the absolute power dynamic that defined his existence. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice shaking with a raw, intense fury that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with his absolute obsession. "I have never despised you, not for a single second. But I broke your trust." "I don't care about the world outside this room, Louisa," he interrupted, leaning down until his lips almost brushed hers, his dark eyes burning with an absolute, frightening intensity. "My obsession with you was never about having a perfect, flawless wife. It was about the fact that you are the only thing in this life that belongs entirely to me. I hid the truth because I refused to let your own mind destroy you from the inside out. I would fight for you every single morning for the rest of my life if I had to." He pressed his forehead against hers, his breathing heavy, his possessiveness radiating through every line of his body. "I forgave you the very second it happened. The only person punishing you is yourself." Hearing the absolute finality in his voice, the heavy armor of her guilt finally shattered completely. The suffocating dread that had triggered her amnesia for 8 long months evaporated into the warmth of his embrace. Her mind finally accepted the absolute forgiveness she had been denying herself, locking the memory of him into place, permanently. The next morning, the sun broke over the horizon, painting the bedroom in a warm, uninterrupted light. Louisa opened her eyes slowly, the familiar weight of Yuryeong's arm anchored over her waist. She didn't blink in confusion. She didn't look around the room, searching for clues of her own identity. Instead, she turned her head and looked directly at her husband. Every single memory of their past, their laughter, their intense trials, and the previous night's absolute surrender, perfectly intact. The psychological fog had vanished entirely, leaving behind a profound, crystal-clear reality. The cycle was permanently broken. Yuryeong shifted, his dark eyes opening instantly. He didn't speak. He simply searched her face, his entire body bracing for the daily routine of reintroduction. Louisa smiled, reaching up to cup his cheek. "Good morning, Yuryeong." The relief that washed over his features was instantaneous, shattering his usual stoic composure. He pulled her fiercely into his chest, burying his face in her neck, his grip so tight it left no doubt that he would never let her go. He had won the war for her mind, not through force, but through an uncompromising, protective devotion. "You remember," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed the world to see. "I remember everything," she whispered, wrapping her arms securely around his neck. "The guilt is gone. I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly where I belong." Years would pass, and the grand estate would fill with the sounds of a growing family, shared anniversaries, and a lifetime built on absolute, unyielding trust. The selective amnesia never returned. The medical anomaly that had once threatened to tear them apart became nothing more than a distant shadow, a historical footnote in a love story that had proven entirely indestructible. Every single morning for the rest of her life, Louisa woke up next to the man who had fought to keep her whole. And every single morning, she chose to love him all over again, completely on purpose, with absolutely no room left for doubt.